Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your old house? Things where you are? Everything here is fantastic. In 2020, I culled my collection of over 400 games down to about 75, and today we're going to talk about one of the games that made the cut, and this should come as no surprise to anybody who knows me. That is Imperial Settlers from Portal Games. Now, full disclosure, I have been involved with and worked for Portal Games in some capacity for the last 8 years. So, is this an unbiased review? I would like to think so, because Imperial Settlers is the entire reason that I found Portal Games and that I fell in love with Portal Games and that I've stuck around. This game is still probably my second favorite game of all time. And no, I'm not going to tell you what number one is until we get there. It's still on my shelf. I know this week has been all about two-player, and this technically is a 1 to 4-player game, but let's be honest, this is a two-player game that can support more players. I think the vast majority of playtesting and balancing that was done for this game was done as a two-player game, and it works really well with two. It works fine with three, and it's playable with four, but it drags. It drags a lot. As does any, people like to call this multiplayer solitaire. I don't agree with that. I think that there is a good bit of interaction and a good bit of, not necessarily racing, but to some degree racing that needs to be done in order to win this game. And so any type of game where you're kind of siloed and you're building your own little thing tends to drag the more players that you add. So if you're not familiar with Imperial Settlers, here we go. This is a tableau building, engine building card game that plays over 5 rounds. You start the game by choosing a faction, and then you have a faction deck. There are, in the base set, there were 4 factions, and then there is a whole bunch of extra factions that we added over the years. Here's the Romans, here's the Japanese. Every faction has their own unique faction deck, and the kind of magic secret sauce to this game is that all of the factions are unique, meaning that they all play differently. For instance, the Romans, they build a lot, and their buildings build on top of each other, meaning that building Roman buildings gives you more ability to build more Roman buildings, right? The Japanese are traders. They're going to trade a lot of resources. The Egyptians are gold finders. The Egyptians dig up gold and build monuments, and the barbarians are barbaric. They attack and take things. So the theming of the factions really comes across when we're talking about how this game works. So not only do you have faction decks, there is a common deck that everybody uses, and this is in the center of the table. This is a 2014 copy. If it's not obvious, I've played it quite a bit. These cards represent just kind of like, lands and places that you can take and add them to your empire. So in the game, you're building your empire. You're going out, you're taking control of foreign land, foreign, technology, and adding it to your empire, building up as you go. To do that, there are 4 resources. There's 3 resources, and then there's people. People are a resource. Food, stone, wood. There's also gold in here somewhere. Gold is a wild resource that anybody can use. And then there are swords and shields, which are used for attacking and defending. Basically, everybody's got a faction board. They look like this. You choose one for your particular faction. Say we're going to play as the Barbarians, my personal favorite faction. This sits in front of you. And when you build your cards, say you're going to build one of your faction cards, it's going to go on the right-hand side of your board. It's going to go in a particular column based on whether it's a production card, a feature card, or an action card. This is an action, so it'll go down here. And common buildings that you build, like this feature card, will go on the right-hand side of your board. This is important because common cards, the cards that are, if you imagine this is like we're going out and attacking and conquering new land, these are kind of out there. They're not in your empire proper. They're kind of out into the wild. These cards can be attacked, can be taken, can be sacked. Cards in your empire like proper are protected, so they typically can't be affected by other players taking a raise action. A raise action is using the sword to destroy somebody's building, which gives you some resources. Can't do that on faction buildings. There are cards that allow you to attack faction buildings. So, you know. So basically, you're building cards, right? You're paying a certain number of resources to put those cards into play that are going to give you features. They're going to give you something. Production gives you production. At the start of each round, which I mentioned there are 5, you're going to have a production. You're going to get all of the goods that are listed on your production board, plus anything that would come from production cards that you play, such as this builder is going to give you an extra wood and a stone. So every production, you're going to gather up your production. You're going to get all these resources, and, you know, you're going to be able to play cards with them. Cards cost resources, put them into play, gain their thing. That's what production does. Feature cards do something when something happens. They basically are like instant responses to other actions. For instance, this one says, well, this one just has a building bonus, which means it doesn't have like a triggerable action, but it has a building bonus of, for each pink, meaning this is a pink card, in your empire, additionally draw 1 card. So play it, or you get a point for each pink, and you draw 1 card. Other features will actually say, like, when you play a whatever. Here we go. Here's a feature. Here's a gallows that says each time you raise, gain 1 point. So if you raise, attack somebody's building, you gain a point. And then action cards are cards that you can trigger. Usually they require resources. You can use them once per round. So say I'm going to use this card that's the pack card says spend a person to choose 1 enemy's building and gain 1 of the goods shown in its raise field. So gaining it up here. I put a dude on here to mark that I've used it. Now this particular one says I can activate it twice. So I could actually use this twice per round. But that's basically it. You're going to take 5 rounds. There's a little bit of a draft in the beginning. There's what's called the lookout phase, which is how you're going to get more cards in your hand. Those are going to come from this common deck. They're going to basically be a draft where you're going to put 4 out, choose 1, next person chooses 1, that sort of thing. There are also production cards that'll let you draw. Anytime you're allowed to draw a card, you can choose which deck to draw from. And you play 5 rounds. Most points wins. Pretty straightforward system, and the reason that this one is staying in my collection, not only, you know, I already told you that I have worked or have done work for Portal Games for 8 years, and so it's obviously going to stay in my collection because of that. I have a whole shelf that's just Portal products. I have all of them, so they're not part of my collection because they're staying. Those are part of my collection because they're part of my work, right? For part of the work that I do for Portal. This one, however, will stay in my collection forever because it is just an amazing engine building game. The neat part about it is, like I told you earlier, the factions are all very, very different. They all play very, very different. And within the deck of cards that is your faction, there are basically 3 kind of engines in here. And as you're playing, based on the cards that you're drawing, you're only going to see a small fraction of these cards throughout the game. You're going to have to adjust your strategy based on the cards that you're drawing in order to be able to score massive amounts of victory points. So there's going to be cards in here that work really well together, and there's going to be cards in here that kind of work together, and then there's going to be cards in here that work for a different strategy. So there's basically 3 different strategies baked into these decks. And as you're playing, you have to kind of manipulate both your faction cards and these common cards into some sort of winning strategy, and that is the joy of this game. I have heard that, you know, in 2019, 2018, Portal released Empires of the North, which is a separate game, a revamped version of this that's separate, that has much more streamlined decks. They're much more synergistic, meaning that there's not cards, it doesn't have 3 varying strategies within each deck. And people like that because it is kind of more upfront with what you need to do. You draw cards, you go, all right, that makes sense to me, I play it and do it. This, you have to be a lot more choosy. This feels a lot more like playing a collectible card game in a sense that you really have to adjust your strategy based on not only what you are drawing, but what your opponent is doing. Because they might be playing cards that are going to dramatically affect your Empire cards or even your common cards, and you really have to be conscious about that. And sometimes you have to hate draft. Sometimes you just have to take something because they can't have it, right? So it's a very strategic, very I guess, thinky game. It's a very rich and deep game with lots of different gameplay options. You can play, the Barbarians are my absolute favorite faction. You can play them, you would take 3 or 4 or 5, 6 gameplays to really understand all the various ways that these guys can score points. The same with all the other factions. And the game came with 4 in the box. So you need like 32 plays just to figure out how all the factions play. There's so much depth. And then we had 4 or 5 expansion factions. I think 4 expansion factions. There's a solitaire campaign scenario. You can also play it co-op. There's just a whole lot of content for this, and it's still just, every time it comes out, every time I get to play it, I'm just in my happy place. It is such a great game. I will never let go of this, ever. This particular copy. This was the copy I brought home from Gen Con 2014. It'll stay forever. I think it's even signed from Ignacy. Nope. There you go. Imperial Settlers, Portal Games, Ignacy Chevee. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends, wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again on Monday. Today's word you should know to sound smart is lithe. It is an adjective meaning having a body and or mind that is limber, flexible, and supple. The coconut trees, lithe and graceful, crowd the beach, like a minuet of slender, elderly virgins adopting flippant poses. William Manchester, an American historian. Lithe, L-I-T-H-E. I never really thought that flexible and supple. I always just thought lithe was like thin. I didn't necessarily know that it was whatever.